I'd like to start with prayer and then we'll get into it. Father, we thank you again for the Sabbath day and this opportunity to gather together, even if we're at a long distance from each other. And I just pray that you'd guide what I share here and guide our thoughts, that we'll understand what you want and that we'll learn to trust you in whatever you say. Pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we have this verse here from 2 Peter 1:19. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. And what I want to do is look at some prophecy that has been fulfilled very accurately, and then look at some things that are predicted to be coming. And basically, if God was accurate in the past, he is going to be accurate in the future with prophecy. So that's what we're going to look at. And we'll start with the story of the Tower of Babel. Genesis 10, verses 8 through 12. And Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So Nimrod was Noah's great-grandson, and he was the first one to come up with the idea of a kingdom where one person ruled an area. And it says here, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. And so we're going to look a little bit at Babel and what was going on there. This was shortly after the flood, around the year 2400 BC. And God had told the people, he told Adam in the beginning, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Well, then he also came and told the people after the flood, spread out and, repopulate the earth so that, there's people all over the earth. Well, Nimrod didn't want that, and he went a different direction. And here in Genesis 11, verse 1 through 9, I won't read the whole thing, but give the background here. The whole earth was of one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So they wanted to build kind of a centralized place and get to be well known, get a good reputation, get to be famous in their area there. And it says that the Lord came down and saw what they were doing, and he didn't appreciate it. He didn't like what they were doing, and they were supposed to spread out over the earth. And so God undid their union there. He confounded the languages, and people, when they couldn't understand each other, they spread out over the earth. And so the Tower of Babel was originally built, but it was basically then abandoned. People left, and the Tower of Babel was kind of abandoned for a while, but it came back later. And we have an old encyclopedia from way back in the, 1800s or something like that, a Bible encyclopedia. And in there we found the Babylonian tradition of the Tower of Babel. And according to the Babylonians, they said, not long after the flood, men were so puffed up with their strength and stature that they began to despise the gods and labored to erect the tower now called Babylon, intending thereby to scale heaven. But when the winds approached the sky, lo, the gods called in the aid of the winds and overturned the tower. The ruin is still called Babylon, because until this time all men had used the same speech, but now there was sent on them a confusion of diverse tongues. And it doesn't say it in the Bible, but Ellen White gives the description of when God came down and he gave them different languages, and they left off their building project, and he sent lightning and it broke off the top of the tower. Well, it kind of gives a little bit of that impression here that the tower was overturned. But then years ago, when the archaeologists were excavating in the area of Babylon, they found an inscription by Nebuchadnezzar himself about the Tower of Babel. And he said, "A former king built the temple of the seven lights of the earth, but he did not complete its head. Since a remote time, people had abandoned it, without order expressing their words. Since that time, earthquakes and lightning had dispersed its sun-dried clay. The bricks of the casing had split, and the earth of the interior had been scattered in heaps." And according to some of the ancient writings of the people that lived in that area, that archaeologists have found, the people that lived there had the idea that the sky was supported on the tops of the mountains. And since that area of Iran and Iraq and that whole area there is very flat, at least in the area where ancient Babylon was, it was very flat. So they made artificial mountains and they call them ziggurats. And so there's various places in that area that have these big ziggurats that people built. And on top of them, they would put some kind of a shrine, which was the place where their god lived. And so the Tower of Babel, or Babylon, was in that area, and it was rebuilt several different times, at least what archaeologists think probably was the Tower of Babel, had been rebuilt several times, and then it kind of went into ruins. But during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the tower was known as Etemenanki, which means the temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. And there is an inscription that they found in Babylon there. It's a big rock, and it's called the Tower of Babel Stela. And you can kind of see on the rock, there's an engraving of a person there. And in the drawing, you can see what this engraving actually originally looked like. And that is supposedly Nebuchadnezzar himself standing in front of the Etemenanki. And then the inscription says, "Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, am I. In order to complete Etemenanki and Enimni Anki," I don't know that I'm pronouncing that right, but anyway, "I mobilized all countries everywhere, each and every ruler who had been raised to prominence over all the people of the world, loved by Marduk," and Marduk was the main god of Babylon, "from the upper sea to the lower sea, the distant nations, the teeming people of the world, kings of remote mountains and far-flung islands. The base I filled in to make a high terrace. I built their structures with bitumen and baked brick throughout. I completed it, raising its top to the heaven and making it gleam bright as the sun." And so this massive building that Nebuchadnezzar is describing here is the tower that's in front of him there. And you see the actual drawing of the tower, and then above that is kind of the floor plan of what the interior probably looked like. Anyhow, that was known as Etemenanki, and archaeologists think that is probably what was originally the Tower of Babel. And it was rebuilt and went into ruins, and then it was rebuilt again, and then Nebuchadnezzar came along, and he kind of made it more majestic than it had been before. And it was a huge building. Here is a painting of what Babylon may have originally looked like, and you can see Etemenanki in the background, and some of the palaces and the gate of Ishtar in the foreground there. And Etemenanki was a huge building. Here we see what is left of it. This is actually a satellite picture of the place that the Etemenanki originally stood. And it doesn't look so impressive there, but when you compare it to a football field, it's pretty big. According to the ancient writings, it was about 300 feet square on the bottom and about 300 feet high. So it was a huge building. And here we have a picture of the US Capitol building and a comparison with the size of the Etemenanki, what was the Tower of Babel. And I'll just back it up again. There you can see the Capitol and the the Tower of Babel makes it look kind of small. Anyway, the city of Babylon kind of grew up around the Tower of Babel, and it was a fairly significant city for quite a while, even back in the times of the Assyrian Empire, before the Babylonian Empire came about. Babylon was there, and the Assyrians captured it, and it was one of their major cities for a while. But then Nebuchadnezzar came to power in about the year 605 BC, and he broke away from the Assyrians, and actually his father was the one that kind of broke away from the Assyrians and established the Babylonian kingdom. And then Nebuchadnezzar came along, and Nebuchadnezzar was a great builder. He liked to make things look really good in the city, and so he had all kinds of building projects going on, and he expanded the city, and he did a lot of fortifications around it. The some of the more prominent buildings had different kinds of colors of baked bricks. They had enameled bricks. Some of them were blue. You saw the Ishtar Gate was blue bricks. Some of the buildings were made with red bricks. Some were yellow. And anyway, the city grew up around the Euphrates River. You can see the Euphrates River running through the middle of the city there. And they had canals, or you might call them moats, all the way around the outside. And that protected the city from basically anybody that would come against it, because they couldn't get to the wall without going through the water. And where the river ran through the middle, every street in the city had a gate that opened to the river, so people had access to the water, and they could close those gates. And so it could be pretty well protected from any invaders. You can see this is a picture looking north. You have the east side, kind of the main part of the city with all of the political buildings in it and the big temple there. And then there was the west side of the river was another section of the city. There was walls all the way around. And anyhow, this is kind of the way Babylon looked. At one time, they figured that it probably had a population of around 200,000. So it was a pretty significant city. The Ishtar Gate, this is the actual gate that was excavated from the city of Babylon, and the archaeologist that excavated it was from Germany. And so he sent all of the bricks and the materials back to Berlin, and they reassembled it in the Berlin Museum. And so that's where this picture was taken. You can see how big that gate was. And it was decorated with blue bricks, and it had all these pictures of animals on it. It was quite an impressive gate. Nebuchadnezzar had 3 palaces. Here you can see 2 of them. There's the northern palace and the southern palace, and then the Ishtar Gate is there. You can see that off to the side. Etemenanki is in the background. Nebuchadnezzar also had another palace kind of, from where this picture would be looking at. He had a summer palace kind of off to the left out of the picture. Anyhow, there was, everything was really fancy and built up. And there was walls around all these things. And so it was quite an impressive city. Now, this is what's left of the northern palace. It's pretty much still in ruins, but you can see the part of the buildings there. This is the northern palace. And in the background, you can see what is now the restored southern palace. It was restored by Saddam Hussein back in the 1980s, I think it was. He rebuilt the walls and the buildings, and he had intentions of making the ancient city site the capital of his empire. Of course, he was taken out of the picture, and so everything that he intended to do kind of just became nothing. But this southern palace is very likely where Nebuchadnezzar was standing when he made that statement in Daniel chapter 2. You remember Daniel chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of the great tree, and the tree was cut down. And when Daniel interpreted the dream, he said, to Nebuchadnezzar, he said, that tree represents you, and you will be cut down unless you humble yourself before God. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar didn't humble himself before God. And a year later, Nebuchadnezzar was walking in his palace, and he said, "Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty?" And so he was bragging to himself and anybody else around him how great Babylon was. And right at that time, God said, "Your kingdom is taken away from you, and you will spend 7 years out in the fields with the animals." So Babylon at one time was a great city. It was just an incredible metropolis and very, very decorated, and a lot of people there and everything, but it didn't last. And Isaiah had prophesied about Babylon about over 100 years before. Isaiah was prophesying during the Assyrian Empire, and Babylon wasn't an empire at that time, but uh, Isaiah was prophesying about what would happen, and that Babylon would be taken down, and it was. And in Daniel chapter 5, we have the story of how Babylon fell. Belshazzar was having a feast to his gods and all of the stuff that was going on there. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords. This is in Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. And he drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple, which is in Jerusalem. So he thought, to really make this a big celebration, he would bring those special cups and pitchers and everything that had been taken out of the temple, and they would really have a really big party there. Well, then the hand came and wrote on the wall, "Your kingdom has been weighed and has been found wanting, and it will be given to the Medes and the Persians." And Belshazzar got so scared that it says that the joints of his loins were loosed and his knees smote one against another. So that, it scared him quite a bit. And while the Babylonians were all in there partying, the Medes and the Persians had surrounded the city, and the Medo-Persian general, his name was Gubaru, and he was under the command of Cyrus, who was the commander of all of the Medo-Persian military. Anyhow, Gubaru had his soldiers dig a channel that diverted the Euphrates River into another area, which lowered the level of the water, and his soldiers were able to march through the river. There was still a river there, but it was much shallower. They were able to march through the water and get into the city, where all those gates opened from the city streets down to the river Euphrates. And his Gubaru's soldiers just basically took over the whole city because those gates were open. They took over the whole city before anybody knew what was going on. And so there was very little resistance, and they basically just easily captured the city. And that was on the night of October 12, 539 BC. And it says there in Daniel chapter 5, "In that night was Belshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old." Now, Darius isn't mentioned as being there with the army right at the time, but he was actually the king of the Medo-Persians, and Cyrus was his nephew, and Cyrus was the commanding general of the whole military. So you have Darius as the king and Cyrus as his general, and then this other general, Gubaru, was under Cyrus. Anyhow, they were the ones that captured the city. And Darius was it says here 62 years old, but he died 2 years later, and Cyrus then became the king. And so it says later in Daniel 6, "So Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian." So, there was two kings right in a row there, and Daniel was still in a government position, not really a government position, but he still had great influence there. And he was still there for the reign of Darius and for Cyrus. Now it's interesting that Isaiah had prophesied about Cyrus way back when, 100 years before Cyrus was even born. Isaiah said in Isaiah 44:28, that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid. And so Isaiah was predicting that Cyrus would be the king that would allow the people of Israel to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city and the temple. And, this was prophesied, way before it happened. And in Isaiah 45, it has some more to say about Cyrus. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden to subdue the nations before him. I will loose the loins of kings. That's what happened to Belshazzar. To open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. Well, that's a pretty good description of what happened when Babylon was captured. The gates were open, there were no guards, and the armies just marched in and took over. So the Babylonian army went down, or the Babylonian Empire went down, and the Medes and the Persians rose up. And Babylon continued to be a fairly significant city for a while, but it slowly declined until it was basically abandoned and uninhabited. And we have this prediction of Babylon. I don't know if you can see all of the words there, but Isaiah 13, verse 19 and 20, and Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. Neither shall the Arabian pitch his tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. This is an actual photo of that area of where the city of Babylon used to be. It's just wilderness area. You see some buildings there, and that's some shrine to something. And there, there's a few buildings in that area, but basically it's wilderness. There's nobody living there. They don't have any fields or vineyards or crops or anything in there. It's just wilderness. It's uninhabited. And goes on and says, but wild beasts of the desert shall lie there. Their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there. That's from Isaiah 13:21. And Jeremiah had some things to say about it also. Therefore, the wild beasts of the desert with the wild beasts of the islands shall dwell there, and the owls shall dwell therein, and it shall be no more inhabited forever, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. These are some actual pictures of animals in that wilderness area. You have the hyenas, the wolves, the jackals, the owls. This is what is there now. And that's what God had predicted, and that's what is there. Here is an illustration of Babylon, kind of a, I don't know if you call it a map, but it's a kind of an artist's illustration of Babylon. And you can see the various palaces, the northern palace, the southern palace, and then kind of off to the top there, that might not show up on your screen very well, but it's the summer palace outside of the city. But notice the shape of the city, kind of a rectangle there, and then the outer wall is kind of around to the right there. Here's a satellite picture of the same area. You see the same building ruins, and notice the shape of things. I've got some things outlined here. What's outlined in yellow was the original city part. I'll back up a couple slides here. There you go. The city that's on the east side of the river. You can see the shape there. And then that's the area that is basically wilderness. I don't know if you can see my pointer in there, but this is a totally wilderness area. And there's nobody living in there. Here's where the Etamananki was. There's a few buildings there, but there's nobody living in there. There's some people living over on the eastern part here where the old wall was. There's actually a ridge running along where this orange line is, where the old wall used to be. And people live on the outside of that, but there's very few living inside of that. And so that prophecy is fulfilled. Jeremiah and Isaiah both said it would be uninhabited. It is uninhabited. We have also a more sure word of prophecy, whereunto you do well that you take heed, as unto a light that shineth in a dark place, until the day dawn and the day star arise in your hearts. God said it would happen, and it's just exactly the way he said. Well, now we'll turn our attention to another aspect of Babylon. We know that all through the Bible, in the Old Testament, God's people are compared to a woman. And there's various verses that talk about that. When his people were faithful, he considered them his wife or his bride. And when they were unfaithful, he described them as a prostitute. And in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 21, he says, "How is the faithful city become a harlot? It was full of judgment, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers." And so it's like his faithful people became unfaithful. The bride became a prostitute. And of course, we have the whole story of Hosea, where he married a prostitute and she was his wife, but she continued as a prostitute. And there was all kinds of problems because of that. And so we have this symbol of a woman representing the church, or a religious body that is supposed to be God's people. Well, in Revelation 12, we have a description of a woman, a pure, virtuous woman who is about to have a child, and it describes her having the baby, and the child was caught up to God. Well, that obviously is a description of Jesus being born. Then the dragon comes along and he wants to persecute the woman. She flees into the wilderness to escape the persecution, and so she's in the wilderness. Well, in Revelation 17, John, who's writing the book, is transported in vision, or somehow he's transported into the wilderness, and he sees a woman, Babylon, there, and she's a prostitute. Well, to me, that's giving the impression that the woman that originally went into the wilderness was a pure, virtuous, faithful church. Okay? She turned into a prostitute. And, in history, we can look back, God's people were faithful for a while, but that slowly deteriorated until all kinds of corruption came into the church, and the church became unfaithful. And the majority of it, at least, was considered unfaithful and corrupted. And in chapter 18, in Revelation 18, there's a call to come out of Babylon. Revelation 18, 2 and verse 4. "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues." And that sounds quite a bit like what Jeremiah said. Jeremiah 51, verse 6, "Flee out of the midst of Babylon, and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity, for this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense." That was a message to God's people back in those days to come out of Babylon, because Babylon was going to fall. They weren't able to actually physically leave Babylon, but they needed to kind of disconnect. Well, after Babylon did fall, then they were able to get out of there and go back to Jerusalem. So Babylon in Revelation is an unfaithful church. So we'll look a little bit at what Babylon is and what happens and all of those things. And based on what it says in Revelation 17 and 18, we'll kind of get a picture of what's going on here. Now, when you look into old Bible commentaries, ones that were written back in the 1800s and in the early 1900s, it's interesting that they are very bold in saying that Babylon is Rome. And we'll look at some of them. I've got some here, some commentaries. Nowadays, that's not the case. You look in the new commentaries and they'll say, well, Babylon is an anti-Christian group, and it's pagan, it's this or that, but they don't specifically identify it as Rome. Well, these commentators are very specific. Albert Barnes, all the circumstances require us to understand this of Rome at some period of its history. For Rome, like Babylon, was the seat of empire and the head of the pagan world. Rome was characterized by many of the same attributes as Babylon, being arrogant, proud, oppressive. Rome, like Babylon, was distinguished for its conquests and for the fact that it made all other nations subject to its control. Rome had been, like Babylon, a desolating power, having destroyed the capital of the Holy Land and burned its beautiful temple and reduced the country to a province. Rome, like Babylon of old, was the most formidable power to contend. Yet it is not, I suppose, Rome considered as pagan that is here meant, but Rome considered as the prolongation of the ancient power of the papal form. So basically, Barnes is saying that Babylon in Revelation is Rome, both in its pagan form under the Caesars and in its papal form under the popes. Then we have from Adam Clark. This is generally understood to be a prediction concerning Rome. No nation of the earth spread their idolatry so far as the ancient Romans. They were as extensive as their conquests, and papal Rome has been not less active in disseminating her superstitions. She has given her rituals, but not the everlasting gospel, to most nations of the earth. And the Roman Catholic religion is one of the largest religions in the whole world. They claim about 1.5 billion people. The religion of Islam is kind of a comparable size, but Catholicism is just a massive religious group. John Wesley says this about Babylon. Babylon the Great. So the city of Rome is called upon many accounts. Babylon was magnificent, strong, proud, powerful. So is Rome also. Babylon was first, and Rome afterwards, the residence of the emperors of the world. What Babylon was to Israel of old, Rome has been both to the literal and spiritual Israel of God. Hence, the liberty of the ancient Jews was connected with the overthrow of the Babylonish Empire. And when Rome is finally overthrown, then the people of God will be at liberty. Some of you are probably familiar with the book, The Two Babylons by Alexander Hislop. And in that book, it's very detailed and very, very thorough in showing how the papacy and all of the things with that religious structure are very similar to the old Babylonian religion and the Babylonian Empire and all that. It's a fascinating book. So Babylon is Rome. And of course, nowadays, it's not politically correct to say something like that because that's hate speech. So you don't find that in new commentaries. But there's quite a few characteristics in Revelation 17 and 18 that pretty well pin down who Babylon is. And we're going to look at some of them now. Revelation 17 verse 9 says, "Here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits." So 7 mountains. Rome has almost all through history been known as the city of 7 hills. And there are actually, you can go online and you can find pictures of the 7 hills, and they're named here on this little map. But, Babylon was sitting on those 7 hills. Babylon is a prostitute. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters. That's Revelation 17:1. And then verse 5, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And so Babylon is a prostitute and the mother of prostitutes. And we know that a prostitute symbolizes a religious system that is not faithful to God, and God's people are warned to come out of them. Now, here is a little news article that says why the Catholic Church is your mother. They claim, the Catholic Church claims the position of being the mother of all Christian churches. And so now they're calling for all the Christians to come back to the mother church. Well, all the mother and all of her daughters are part of Babylon, and they're all corrupted. Well, Babylon is also described as being very wealthy. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. And here, of course, you see the colors. They are well known for dressing in scarlet and various shades of red and purple and whatever. And that verse there goes on, Revelation 17 goes on and says, having a golden cup in her hand. And so there's not only the colors are represented in the church, but also the wealth of the Catholic Church is suggested there. And I found this article from a newspaper or a news agency. It says the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church is impossible to calculate. And in the smaller print there is no doubt, however, that between the church's priceless art, land, gold, and investments across the globe, it is one of the wealthiest institutions on earth. So Rome is involved with economics and control of money systems and all of that. And so there's a lot of economic stuff that's involved there. Revelation 17, verse 1. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials and talked with me, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sits upon many waters. And verse 15 says, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And then verse 18, and the woman which thou sawest is the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So Rome has incredible influence all around the world on politics and all the governments and everything like that. Up in that right-hand corner, we see the Pope in the U.S. Senate. And down in the lower left there, he's in the European Parliament, talking to the European Union members and all the people involved there. And then up at the top, it might be off your screen, but on the left side there is a picture of Pope Francis, and at the top it says, why America needs Pope Francis now. And so, people all around the world are just bowing to the Pope. And if any political leader wants to be really significant, he goes and visits the Pope. And it's like, boy, he's kind of got the inside track there, because he went to see the Pope and they had a private conference, and the Pope goes and visits the kings and the rulers all around the world. He controls people and multitudes and nations and tongues, and he reigns over the kings of the earth. And so there's a lot of political stuff going on there. Okay, another description of Babylon is in Revelation 17, verse 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Now, he's not admiring it in a positive sense. He is admiring it in a negative sense of just incredible awe at how terrible this is. And then Revelation 18:24, in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. And we know the story of the Dark Ages, the Inquisition, and all the things that were happening during those times, and even into our modern time, where the Roman Catholic Church is involved with persecution all around the world. The millions, I don't know, I've heard estimates of 30 million and more people that were killed during the Dark Ages. And even nowadays, in some of the persecutions and stuff that's going on around the world, the Catholic Church is involved, and they're kind of behind it. The wars, the communism and all that kind of thing, there are ties there of things that have been done to God's faithful people all through history. And so the church, the Roman church, is behind all that. Well, the Catholic Church is more than just, or I should say, Babylon is more than just the Catholic Church. Here's a quote from the Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 4. This is actually the book, The Spirit of Prophecy. In Revelation 17, Babylon is represented as a woman, a figure which is used in scriptures as the symbol of a church. A virtuous woman represents a pure church, a vile woman, an apostate church. Babylon is said to be a harlot, and the prophet beheld her drunken with the blood of saints and martyrs. The Babylon thus described represents Rome, that apostate church which has so cruelly persecuted the followers of Christ. But Babylon the harlot is the mother of daughters who follow her example of corruption. Thus are represented those churches that cling to the doctrines and traditions of Rome and follow her worldly practices, and whose fall is announced in the second angel's message. So Babylon is more than just the Roman Catholic Church. It's all of those that follow her ways. Baptists, Lutherans, Episcopalians, I don't know all the names of them, but they all are basically following, and a lot of them have very close connections with the Catholic Church, and they are not separated at all. So they are all included there. There's other details of the descriptions of what Babylon consists of, but we're going to look a little more now. I want to just bring in this verse again. We have a more sure word of prophecy that we would do well to listen to. Prophecy has been very accurate in the past about old Babylon, all the things that happened there, and its condition in our modern time. It's desolate and all that. That was prophesied, and it came true. John described Babylon, and it's a very accurate description of the Catholic Church and all the things that are involved there. But then there's things that are still coming, they're still coming in the future. And so we're going to look a little bit at that, of the description that John gives, or that the angel gave to John to give to us, of some of the things that are still coming. And I'm sure that most of you are kind of familiar with some of this, but we'll just kind of review it a little bit. Of course, a woman represents a church, and in this case, it's a corrupt and unfaithful church, Babylon. Well, she's riding in Revelation 17, talks about Babylon riding on a beast that has heads and horns, and there's other details there. Well, the beast and the horns and the heads and all that, they represent political leaders and rulers and empires and all that. Here's some verses from other places that kind of confirm that. Daniel 7, verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings. So beasts represent kings. Also, it says in verse 23, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom. So it can be a king or a kingdom. And then it talks about the 10 horns being 10 kings. That comes from Daniel 7. In Revelation 17, here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and there are 7 kings. And so these different details are describing kings and kingdoms and different levels of rulership. Revelation 17, verse 12, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. Well, so the woman represents a religious power. The beast and his horns and the details of the beast represent political powers, and they're joined together. The woman is riding the beast, and you could assume that the rider has control. So the woman has control of the beast, but the beast carries the woman wherever the woman wants to go. So the political powers are helping the church to accomplish what it wants. So that's kind of the picture that we're getting there. Revelation 17, verse 8 says, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So now we look at, what is the bottomless pit? Well, the Greek word there is abyssos, which is, our English version of that is abyss. And it means something really deep. Well, in the story of Jesus in Luke 8, we have the story where Jesus crossed the lake with his disciples in the boat, and they got to the other shore, and these demon-possessed men came running out to meet Jesus, and he was going to cast the demons out of the men, and the demons said, there in Luke 8, verse 31, they besought him that he would not command them to go out into the deep. Well, there, that deep is the same word as the bottomless pit, abusos. So that implies that the demons didn't want Jesus to send them back to the abyss, which sounds like some kind of holding place for the demons. It's like it's a prison. And in Revelation 20, verses 1 to 3, we have a description of Satan being chained for 1,000 years and cast into the bottomless pit and shut up. The angel cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal upon him. So apparently the bottomless pit is where demons are in, maybe you could call it minimum security, because they do come out sometimes. So this beast in Revelation 17, it says it comes out of the bottomless pit. So this is a demonically controlled political power. Okay? So it's pagan, it's demonic, it's atheist, and in Revelation 17, verse 3, says, he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast full of names of blasphemy. And so this beast has all kinds of blasphemy involved. Well, that's saying things that are dishonorable to God. Blasphemy is saying disrespectful things about God, showing him disrespect and all that. So this beast is demonic, pagan, anti-Christian, and all of this, and it's being controlled by the papacy. So you have this combination of powers here. The woman rides the beast. The woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Babylon, the papacy, reigns over the kings of the earth. Back in the Dark Ages, the papacy had power over almost all of the European nations. Whatever the Pope said, the kings had to do. They had no choice. If they disobeyed the Pope, he would excommunicate them and probably send an army from another country against them and wipe out their country. So the woman rides the beast, the woman controls, the church controls political powers. This is the stuff that is coming in the future. It's starting now and it's coming in the future. Now, I want to show you a picture here. Maybe some of you have seen this. This is an old painting of what the artist thought the Tower of Babel would have looked like. This painting was done in 1563. Here is a picture of the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France. Do you see any resemblance? The Tower of Babel is in process. It's unfinished. And on the website for the European Parliament, they specifically say that they designed this building to appear unfinished because they are in the process of continuing to develop their union of powers and all that kind of thing. So there's some things going on there. Another thing about Babylon and the beast, Revelation 17:14, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. They that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. This is basically saying there's going to be persecution. So we've got these various aspects of things that are coming with this beast and Babylon and all that. The political powers are going to be controlled by the church. They're going to persecute. And, we're kind of getting a picture of this. Of course, we have a positive outcome here because it says the Lamb will overcome them. There will be persecution. They will, give trouble to God's people, but Christ and his people will come out on top, okay? Another aspect that's brought in here is in Revelation 17, verse 16, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, which are various political powers, 10 of them. These shall hate the whore and shall make her desolate and naked and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So even though they start out being controlled by the papacy, at some point they're going to resent that. They're going to turn against the papacy and destroy it. We don't know just how that's going to happen, but it's prophesied here. Another aspect of it is that there's much entanglement with economics and world trade and all that. Revelation 18:11 says, the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her. This is when Babylon falls. They shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. And then Revelation 18, verse 15, the merchants of these things, and it has just given a long list of all the different things that have been in world trade. The merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing. So when Babylon goes down, there's going to be a massive economic collapse. World trade is going to be disrupted, and all of these things are going to be happening. And this is the prophecy of what's coming. And again, I want to reemphasize, we can trust prophecy. It has been accurate in the past about Babylon, old Babylon. It described it accurately. It was, the prophecies of Revelation that lead up to what's already happened were accurate. Babylon and the papacy, this was all predicted, and it happened the way it is, the way it was predicted. And the things that are still coming in the future, we don't know just as how they're going to work out, but God said it, and we can